Philosophy in general can be a difficult area of study, but Immanuel Kant took it to a whole new level. So it ain't surprising that a lot of folks struggle to understand what he was trying to say. Geisler and Turek, on the other hand, don't merely struggle to understand Kant, they's actively hostile to understanding him. Hey there, folks. Bertram the Barely Bearable Atheist here, continuing our series on the book I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. Last time, we saw our intrepid heroes engaging in furious mental gymnastics as they tried to discredit David Hume's approach to empirical verification while writing a book that claims to give us empirical verification for God's existence. Not surprisingly, they ended up oversimplifying Hume's empiricism until it was a feeble straw man, and then quote-unquote defeating the straw man. Not a terribly useful approach, but it's what you gotta do when your rhetorical technique is based on a cartoon roadrunner. So of course they's going to try the same approach with Immanuel Kant, but this time they's going to screw it up so bad that their version of Kant's philosophy don't even rise to the level of being a straw man. And in the process, Norm Geisler writes a sentence that may be the scariest thing he says in the entire book. But before we look at Geisler and Turek's philosophical butchery, let's take a step back and do a quick review of Kant's background to better set the stage. Immanuel Kant was a contemporary of David Hume's, more or less, and was also a sincere Christian his entire adult life. Initially, he believed in the same sort of philosophy as Blaise Pascal and his predecessors, but when he read the works of David Hume, he experienced a kind of awakening that caused him to rethink his entire philosophy. Indeed, without Hume, it's possible that he might never have become the preeminent philosopher that he is today. Not that he agreed with Hume, necessarily, of course. His critique of pure reason is largely an attempt to address what he saw as the shortcomings of Hume's empiricism and to explore the mechanisms and constraints of human knowledge in general with the goal of leading us all to a better understanding of truth. The result was a body of philosophical work that still today has philosophers arguing, not just about whether he was right, but about what he really even meant. And at this point, we's on the edge of a rabbit hole that makes Alice's look like a divot on a golf course, so we's going back away slowly. Suffice it to say that Kant's goal was to understand knowledge and how we know it. And that's enough for us to be able to have a look at Geisler and Turek's discussion of his philosophy and to see how badly they got it wrong. So let's open up their book and dig in. Quote, Immanuel Kant's impact has been even more devastating to a Christian worldview than David Hume's. For if Kant's philosophy is right, then there's no way to know anything about the real world, even empirically verifiable things. End quote. And here's what I mean about not even rising to the level of a straw man. Describing Kant's philosophy as saying we can't know anything about the real world is like describing the gospel as saying that it's natural to sin and we can't do nothing about it. It ain't exactly false, but to say only that much and just leave it at that is to leave out so much as to make your description unrecognizable. To make a straw man argument, you at least have to refer to enough of the original to establish a recognizable connection, but Geisler and Turek ain't even doing that. In fact, this description is so sketchy, we can't be sure they ain't describing their own philosophy. Remember back on page 25 they said, quote, outside of the knowledge of our own existence, we deal in the realm of probability. Whatever we've concluded about the existence of God, it's always possible that the opposite conclusion is true. 95% plus certainty is the best that fallible and finite human beings can attain for most questions. End quote. So Geisler and Turek agree with Kant that we cannot know the external world with 100% certainty because we's fallible and limited. Now granted, they was saying that in the context of denying that atheists can know for sure that God don't exist, but still their basis for making that claim aligns roughly with what Kant was saying. And in fact, Kant emphatically shared their belief that nobody can know for sure that God don't exist. But now we's talking about Immanuel Kant, a Christian philosopher who Geisler and Turek accuse of having devastating effects on the Christian worldview. So, of course, they's going to take this one isolated facet of Kant's philosophy and try and make it look silly. Quote, "To get a handle on this, look for a second out the window at a tree. Kant is saying that the tree you think you are looking at appears the way it does because your mind is forming the sense data you're getting from the tree. You don't really know the tree in itself. You only know the phenomena your mind categorizes about the tree. In short, you can't know the real tree in itself, only the tree as it appears to you." End quote. Yeah, they so desperate to mock Kant that they actually made a disparaging pun on his last name there at the end. But even this attempt to mock Kant falls as flat as a cartoon coyote because what Kant is saying is perfectly reasonable if you think about it. Though granted, that's a big if for some folks. But anyways, when you look at something, you're not directly perceiving the thing itself. You're perceiving the appearance of the thing, which is why appearances can sometimes be deceiving. Kant is just pointing out something commonplace and obvious on his way to make a more subtle and profound point. But Geisler and Turek ain't following him because they's too busy looking for stuff they can point at and laugh. And laugh they do. Quote, "Whew! Why is it that the average person on the street doesn't doubt what he sees with his own two eyes, but supposedly brilliant philosophers do?" End quote. And they meant that as a rhetorical question, but in fact we can answer it in two words: Dunning-Kruger. So they go on and mock philosophy for another paragraph or two. Quote, "If you want to make the obvious seem obscure, just let a philosopher get a hold of it." End quote. And then, oh, you knew this was coming, didn't you? Hey, bring out their roadrunner shtick again. Quote, "Kant commits the same error as Hume. He violates the law of non-contradiction. He contradicts his own premise by saying that no one can know the real world while he claims to know something about it, namely that the real world is unknowable. In effect, Kant says the truth about the real world is that there are no truths about the real world." End quote. Again, tell me you didn't do the reading without telling me you didn't do the reading. Geisler and Turek's discussion of Kant is so far removed from Kant's actual reasoning that it ain't even a straw man. It's a worse argument than accusing Christians of cannibalism because they take communion. It's particularly ironic because Kant was a Christian, and he went out of his way to avoid denying that God was true. Which brings up a point that I found particularly puzzling in this whole section. I can't figure out why Geisler and Turek is so hell-bent on demolishing Kant. Hume, maybe I can understand because Hume rejected the whole concept of metaphysical truth. But Kant defended metaphysics. And then, when they did decide to talk about Kant, they didn't bring up enough of his philosophy to even make him worth mentioning. I mean, it don't really relate to the points they're going to try and make in the rest of the book. They could have just skipped mentioning him at all, and I don't think anybody'd even notice. So why are they so mad at Immanuel Kant? Did Norm Geisler get bad grades in philosophy class, and so now he's on a crusade against all post-Enlightenment philosophers? Did he and or Frank Turek have to read Kant's stuff in one of their classes and just got frustrated by the difficulty of the concepts? Did they jump to the conclusion that Kant was nothing more than a famous agnostic, and so they wanted to take a swap at him because they just don't like agnostics? I don't know. I just don't get it. Maybe it'll come up again later on in the book and we'll get some more context. And mind you, I don't know that I agree with everything that Kant said, neither. I mean, smarter folks than me is still arguing about it, so, he could have been partially or completely wrong about some things. But even given my limited understanding of Kant, it's pretty clear to see that Geisler and Turek's criticism ain't even close to being valid. But believe it or not, it gets better. And by better, I mean, well, maybe I should just let you see for yourselves. Quote, What we are saying is that you really do know the thing in itself. You really do know the tree you're seeing because it is being impressed on your mind through your senses. Your mind doesn't mold the tree molds your mind. End quote. And that's really something. Perceptions don't exist. The physical senses is just conduits that the tree itself reaches through to impress itself directly on your mind like a metal seal impressing itself onto sealing wax. I mean, that's the actual metaphor that they use. And that makes sense, don't it? I mean, that's why they ain't no such thing as optical illusions. That's why everybody sees the same colors when they look at a yellow and white dress. That's why we ain't never fooled by appearances. The thing itself is impressing itself directly on your mind via your senses. Misperceptions don't exist because perceptions don't exist. Quote, there's no gulf between your mind and the real world. End quote. And are you ready to hear Geisler and Turek's proof for this unique proposition? Are you just waiting to hear what kind of arguments and evidence they offer to justify this conclusion? Well, sorry, you're just going to have to go on waiting. They don't even attempt to justify their claim. Apparently, we're just supposed to take their word for it. Which brings us up to the statement that may be the scariest words written in this whole book. Quote, in a philosophy class that I, Norm, was teaching, somebody gave Norm Geisler a philosophy class to teach? Holy Hannah, that's like getting your medical advice from Donald Trump. That's like letting PETA cater your barbecue. That's a bad, bad idea. Do I need to read y'all the story? It's another Norm Geisler story about he presented the roadrunnerized version of his supposed debunking of Kant's philosophy, and a student goes, golly gee, Dr. Geisler, it can't be that easy, which is actually a pretty astute observation. But Geisler dismisses this objection by citing an offhand quip from the Reader's Digest about pretty theories meeting brutal facts. So, yay scholarship, I guess. Well, maybe there's a peer-reviewed version of the Reader's Digest somewheres. But that's it. That's their entire case against Immanuel Kant, a fellow Christian and one of the most influential and preeminent philosophers of the past 300 years. Even for Geisler and Turek, that's a pretty hasty and superficial dismissal. Not only do they fail to engage with the actual intent of Kant's philosophy, they don't give us any reason to think they even understood the basics of it. The only thing I can think of is that this is yet another instance of their hostility towards thoughtful and highly educated folks. Like maybe it's supposed to reflect badly on college professors or something. Or maybe they just had an inkling of how far in over their heads they was, and we was just rushing to get back to more comfortable ground. But it still leaves me shaking my head. And for once, I ain't sure there's much more to be said. But either way, that's going to do it for me for today. Next time, Geisler and Turek's going to shift gears and teach us all about how we can know the truth about God. And I expect they'll put a bit more effort into that one. Or, yeah, then again, maybe not. Anyways, thanks for watching, and please be kind wherever possible.